What's up everyone, Lance Hedrick here, and today we're taking a look at the new Gaggia Classic Pro E24 up against the Rancilio Silvia. This duel has been reiterated over the years multiple times, whether you should get the Gaggia Classic Pro or the Rancilio Silvia. Both are single boiler dual use machines, which means you have one boiler doing double duty, pulling espresso and steaming your milk. In the United States, the Gaggia Classic Pro tends to be around $500, $550 US, whereas the Silvia is closer to $900. So there is quite a big price disparity between the two there. But here in Europe, it's more like 450 euros for this bad boy right here and around 599 for the Silvia. So a bit smaller of a price disparity there. Now, of course, that's likely because both of these are manufactured here in Europe, and the price for the Gaggia going to the States seems to be not as affected as that of the Silvia. We have the new brass boiler inside the Gaggia Classic Pro, and so I figured it was time to do a little refresh on this comparison. So the way this video will go is we're going to start off just by what's on the outside. We'll look at ergonomics, we'll look at the form factor, and we'll see how you use both of these machines. Then we're going to take a look at what they actually are doing with the quality of the espresso they make, as well as the quality of their features with steam and with the brew temperature coming out. Lastly, we'll take a look at the insides and we'll see what the build quality is like, as well as their capability to receive different modifications. So let's go ahead and jump straight in. For the longest time, Gaggia Classics have had aluminum boilers. Well, they recently, just this year, released this new E24 version, which has replaced the aluminum boiler with a brass boiler that is a bit bigger. So as opposed to 3 ounces or around 105 milliliters, we now have a 4-ounce boiler, which is about 138 or so milliliters. Now, over the years, many people have had issues with pitting and corrosion in their aluminum, and so they made this switch. Interesting is, I believe in 2015, Gaggia did put a brass boiler into those machines, but apparently the audience, the customer base, preferred the aluminum for whatever reason, whether it was the weight of it or whether it was faster heat up time. Whatever it was, they went back to aluminum, but they've made the change yet again, and it seems to be a very welcome change. The density of that brass is much higher than the density of the aluminum, about 4 times as dense, and the weight of it is quite a bit more as well. So it's a heftier piece with more volume, and therefore it should have a higher equilibrium for temperature stability, as well as more steam power, but we'll take a look at that here in a bit on the performance. The brass in here is lead-free, and it follows the standards whether you're in California or in EU or wherever else. So it's a lead-free boiler similar to that in the Silvia. When we look at the machine, it has the same facade, the same outside as the Gaggia Classics that we know and love. It has just the 3 actuator buttons, on and off. Then we have brew, we have steam. Obviously it's unplugged. And then we, of course, have our 58mm group head, but it has the off-kiltered wings right here, which is a very specific type of portafilter. So if you're wanting to replace it, you have to get a specifically made Gaggia portafilter. These are naked portafilters that fit in the Gaggia. As you see, it has these off-kilter little wings on here. Now, when we put it into the group head, it is immediately attached to that brass boiler. So you have a hunk of about, it's like a 1.5 kilo, 2 kilo piece of brass right above, and then you have that ½ kilo or about a pound worth of a portafilter with stainless steel right below. On the side, we have the same steam nog that we have on all the other Gaggia Classics, or should I say Gaggia Plastics. I'm just kidding, there's not much plastic in this machine, but I do despise that steam knob. We have the same water reservoir, same amount that is held inside. We have inside the water reservoir itself the same 2 plastic tubes that bring up water and that reject water from the OPV, which we'll see that inside here in a bit. And we have the same little area where the rejected water from the solenoid coming from the pressurized group head is released into the drip tray itself. We have this plastic, little bad boy with a grate. And here we have our drip tray. But it's very easy to just slide right on out. No worries, okay? Now inside the Rancilio, we have a much bigger boiler. It's about 300 milliliters, so a little over double the size of the newest boiler inside the Gaggia. So you get a lot more temperature stability in theory, and you get a lot more steam pressure that comes out, making steaming happen a lot faster. The water reservoir is also quite a bit bigger, so you can hold more water in there. And honestly, the insides, as we'll see in a bit, are much cleaner. We have the brew actuator, the hot water, we flush hot water, and we have the steam actuator, as well as the on-off button, which is also spring activated, just like the button on the Gaggia. You pull off the grate, and in here you have the drip tray separate. Now, the drip tray is made of a stainless steel. If you've just purged water or it's been sitting there, you're pulling a lot of shots and it's filling up due to the solenoid kind of spraying some water out. If you're surging some water through in order to get back to equilibrium, you're cycling the heating system, whatever, this can get very hot. And because how shallow it is, it can spill really easily. Of course, I do like that it's steel and not plastic, but at what cost, Rancilio? At what cost? I'm also not a big fan of how the drip tray just kind of sits, or the grate kind of sits here. It doesn't feel like it fits as well. I like that this is kind of recessed into the drip tray, but, you know, that's just kind of being nitpicky. I definitely prefer the steam one on the Rancilio, but in the end, getting silky milky is getting silky milky. If you've got the goods, you got the goods, and you can get it on any machine. So we won't belabor that point too much. Now, the portafilter here is a standard E61, and this one is a much more robust portafilter than the one inside of the Gaggia. So with this, you can take any old 58mm E61 compatible portafilter, you can toss it in your machine. It has a plastic handle just like on the Gaggia, but it does feel a bit more robust overall, probably just because of the weight. The Gaggia comes in at about 500 grams, and then this one is at 670 grams, so almost 200 grams more than the one from the Gaggia. Now, when we look inside the portafilters, we can see the baskets, and this is where the first big point of disparity occurs. Inside the Gaggia Classic, it does come with a pressurized basket that's already installed, at least it does out here in Europe with its little float restrictor. We do get some other baskets in this nice little plastic bag. We get a cute little plastic scoop, which I don't really care about. We get a plastic tamper, which I don't really care about. And then we get two other baskets. So these are single-walled baskets, but as you can see, they're very low quality. In fact, on this one, there's actually one hole that's not fully stamped out. Inside the Rancilio, we have a much nicer basket. So this one is a made in Italy. It's still stamped, obviously. The holes are much rounder, and there's not as much kind of leftover debris. I've read online that these are made by IMS, but I don't necessarily think so. IMS usually stamps their baskets, and this just looks like it's made by Rancilio. Either way, you can switch out the baskets in either one of these because both of them are compatible with a wide range of different precision baskets like IMS or VST, or even getting to more fancy baskets, depending on the depth and if they'll fit in the spouted portafilters. Let's fill these with water and let's heat them up. It's test time. Both of them are decent 18-gram baskets, so that we have same baskets going on, and we're just going to pull some espresso that's dialed in the same way on both, and we'll have a little tasty taste of them. Whole Latte Love did some testing on this versus the aluminum boiler, which I thought was interesting. And of course, with the aluminum, because it's smaller and aluminum is not holding the temperature as well as the brass, it takes about 6 cycles, I think, for every 4 that the brass one takes, something along those lines. Gaggia Classic Pro with this brass boiler will stay pretty consistently at 200 Fahrenheit or around 93.5 degrees Celsius whenever you're using it properly. And what I mean by that is you kind of flush some of the water out, allow that heating cycle to start up again, and right when that red light goes on, you start pulling your shot. This is going to keep you within that 200 degree cycle during your espresso with a fluctuation of around 1 to 2 degrees. With the Rancilio, you want to flush a little bit and then start your shot as well, and it'll stick within that range too. Now on both of these, you can increase the temperature by just turning on the steam module for a little bit, because it will activate those heating elements to a higher than normal temperature, and it'll allow that water to get a bit higher, and you can play around with both of these to your heart's content. Obviously that would be temperature surfing because there's no PID controller on either one. Of course, you can modify them with PID controllers, or you can do the best modification out there right now, which is the Gaggiuino on both of these. I will be outfitting the Rancilio Silvia soon with that Gaggiuino, and I'm sure it'll be a much more fun job because how clean the insides are. But anyway, enough yapping, Lance. Let's pull some espresso and get some tasty thick boys into the video. All right, so about a 25-second shot, 18 in, 36 out. Pulled about a second or two faster. About what you'd expect going shot to shot, so a little bit of variation. But anyway, let's go ahead and stir these up and give them a taste. All right, so the one from the Gaggia. Thick, syrupy, chocolatey, caramelly, a little bit of stone fruit popping through. I mean, really nice balanced shot. It's a medium dark roast, so about what you'd expect. This one's a bit fresher, so I'm going to stir it more just so we have a more equal playing field. And other than it being hotter, it tastes virtually identical. Even if the pressure is a little bit different, which they are, it's not that big of a difference when it comes to taste testing. In fact, I did a whole video on this 9 versus 6 bar, and there was virtually no real consistent difference between the two flavor profiles. The biggest difference is going to be the ending of the shot. So this is something I've tried to explain before because people want to swear by the fact different pressures give you a lot different tastes. It's less about the pressure being exerted on the puck and more about the water flow through the puck. At the end of the puck, as it's disintegrating or as it's becoming less capable of maintaining pressure, the water that the pump is able to push out per second is going to increase in order to hit that 9 bar. And so if you have a faster flow of water through the puck, you can have a worse tasting shot. Therefore, people might find they prefer 6 bar shots to 9 bar. If you could drop the flow rate to what it is going through at the end of a 6 bar shot in that 9 bar shot, they'll still taste identical. But anyway, that's getting too far out of zone for this. I do have a video on it which was linked there, but the Gaggia one's a little richer, but it might have just been because a little bit of temperature difference or something along those lines, or the fact it's been sitting out an extra 25 seconds. But in the end, they're virtually identical. I don't think you're getting a better quality shot out of either one of these machines. It comes down to other factors. But let's go ahead and test the temperature, see where they're at with pressure, and continue from there. All right, so we've got my SCASE device, which is essentially a thermoprobe that's housed in some silicone inside of a basket, so it kind of emulates a puck. We're going to read what the temperature is coming out of that shower screen. When the light is on, that means the heating element is off, so it's kind of opposites. So we're going to kind of see what this is like right now. We're up to 93, 94, 94.6, 94.7, 94.8, 94.9, and then it starts to go back down. So heating element is turned back on because we lost a lot of that water. So we're going to let it get back to where the light's on, showing us the heating element is off, and we'll do it another time. Oh, light's back on. Let's go again. So we're rising. We're at 90, 90.5, 90.2, and it's already going back down. So when you do back-to-back shots in such rapid succession, you're not able to maintain that high temp. So that first one, I started after the machine had been sitting here for a while. So it was able to go through multiple cycles once we had fresh water in there. So that water was able to get a full equilibrium at a high temperature through all those heating cycles. Whenever it fills with new water, it's good to let it go through a cycle or two in order to really make sure you have everything sufficiently heated, because once new fresh water gets in, it can lower the temperature of that boiler itself. And so we just want to make sure everything's nice and hot. So we'll do this next test after that heating element has come on for a bit, right before the heating element turns off. So I'm going to let this go off, and I'm going to let the heating element go for a bit, and then we'll start our shot again. All right, heating element is off. Let's go ahead and start our shot. I mean, it's on, I'm sorry. The light is off, heating element's on. Now the element is off again, but let's see where we're at. Now we're at 89, going up, 90, 90.7, 90.8, and then it starts to go back down. If you come up to the machine and it's been on for a while, you may have a higher temperature right off the bat, but once you start pulling shots, it kind of lives at that 90, 91 area. Now, it is pretty easy to get it to live at 93. Whole Latte Love also has this on his video in order to kind of temperature surf it, but if you're not wanting to faff around with temp surfing and you just want to watch the heating element do a cycle, you're probably going to be close to that 90, 91 degrees Celsius, which is great for medium dark roasted coffee. If you're wanting it for lighter roasted coffee, you may need to pay a bit more attention to those cycles. Now I'll do one more test of temperature for this, and that's looking for a lighter roasted coffee where you might want even higher temperature. Now for this, we have the heating element on. Once it turns off, I'm going to actually actuate the steam boiler mode. Now this is going to really heat up the boiler, so you don't want to put it on for too long. So the heating element's off, meaning it should be around that 93 degrees. So of course the light went off because the heating element is on in the boiler because the steam is on. All right, so there we go. Let's go ahead and start the shot. We should rise up pretty rapidly, pretty quickly. Look at this. We're over 94, 95, 96, 97. So as you see, it's easy to hold it for too long. We're at 99. Let's see how high we're going to climb. Over 100 degrees. So you don't want to do it that long. You just want to hold it on for just a bit. It's still, look, it's still temperature ready. It's refilled with cool water, but because how hot it was, it's still temperature ready. So even after that long flush, we could probably still be up close to 100. Let's go ahead and do it again. Flush some more water through, and we're climbing. All right, so there, we did peak at 95. So after that long flush, even with the fresh water that had entered the boiler, we were able to maintain a pretty high temperature. So it's important to note if you're playing around with higher temperatures, don't hold that steam switch down too long. Wait till the heating element has turned off, meaning your boiler is at an understandable 92, 93 degrees. Then you're just gonna flip this on for a couple of seconds. And this will largely be trial and error for you at home because you don't have one of these devices, I would imagine. So for you, maybe 2-3 seconds and see how it tastes. If the sourness is gone from your light roast coffee, then you're probably good. And then just make it sort of a habit to wait till the heating element has turned off, then flip it back on with the steam boiler, and that will give you a good starting place to kind of know, all right, we're at 92, 93 in the boiler. Let's turn this on, ramp the heat up, and continue on. You don't really have to worry nearly as much about the bigger fluctuations you get with the aluminum boiler because this does hold temperature a lot better, especially with that bigger boiler inside. All right, let's do the same to the Silvia. So with the Silvia, it's a little different. When the light is on, that means the heating element is on. So we're letting that water heat up inside the boiler itself. I've warmed up the portafilter. We should be good to go on testing. So we're letting that heat up, and then once it turns off, then we'll go for it. So they're just using basic potentiometers in order to kind of keep the temperature within a certain range. It's not PID controlled, as I said, so it's based off of kind of ranges of temperature, which is why you have to temp surf these types of things. So the heating element just turned off. Let's go ahead and see where we're at. We're at 87, 88, 89, 90, 91, 92, 93, 90. Nope, it starts going back down before hitting 95. So we'll turn this off, we'll let the heating element do its thing, and we'll try again and see what it's like back to back. All right, heating element is off. Let's do it again. So immediately we jumped up to 95. We're at 95.6, 95.7, 95.8, 96, 96.2, 3, 5, 7, 8, 9, 97, 8, 98.3, and I think it's peaked. Nope, 98.4. There we go, and it peaked at 98.4. So running shots in rapid succession, because this boiler is so big, it's not as versatile, I guess, from shot to shot as maybe the Gaggia is. So there's a big jump right there from that. I'm going to just purge a bit of water to kind of get some of that water out of the boiler, replace it with fresh water, and hopefully that will help us cool the water down a bit. And I won't let the heating element get all the way heated up and turned off. Let's put this back in. Heating element is on, but we're going to try to get this in and pulling before it's done. If I can get it right, there we go. All right, let's go and start the shot. Now we're up to 89. There we go, 89.9, 90, 90.1. So as you can see, we can manipulate the temperature based off of the heating cycles, okay? 9.3, 9.4, 9.5. It's not ideal because you do have to do what's called temperature surfing, trying to figure out what works best for you. We're at 91, 91.2, 91.3. But right off the bat, it does have a higher temperature capability without having to actuate the steam wand than the counterpart. Now, both of these have been on for like 30 minutes. Now, there are more advanced ways of doing temp surfing, which you can find online, but just kind of following what these are showing is nice to know where we're at. So we'll do one more. The heating element just turned off. Let's see where we're at now. As you see, we're much higher again. 94.3, 9.44, 9.45. This one seems to stick more between the 94 and 95 degree area when that heating element is fully turned off. However, we're up over 96 now. 97. Oh, we might climb all the way back up to 98. Yep. So this definitely runs hotter than the Gaggia Classic counterpart, especially when they've been on for a while. We'll just test it one more time just to ensure that that is correct. Heating element is off. Let's flush 4 or 5 seconds. 2, 3, 4, 5. We'll take that away. Heating element turns back on. We'll put in the portafilter. And then let's go ahead and start the shot. And let's see where we get to our temperature at. And it's up around that 90 right on the dot. So once that heating element turns off, signaling it's ready, a 5-second purge is going to get you down to 90. And look at that, we're staking right there. The thermal stability on this is actually quite nice once you get to that peak temperature you want. If you want it to be at that 93 mark, you may need to do a 2-second or so purge and let that heating element kind of come off and then continue going. But if you're pulling ultralight roasts, if you're someone that likes light roast espresso, this can do it as long as you're following that heating element. It tends to be above that 95-degree range as long as everything is nicely heated, including that portafilter, including the group head. Everything in there needs to be really well heated. Anyway, let's check the pressures. Where the frick is that coming from? How is there a leak there? I'm out of breath because what I just had to do was very annoying. I took a 2023 Gaggia Classic Pro. I took the split shot off because it was impossible to get off this new one. I yanked off the split shot, I put on the pressure gauge, put it in, and there was leaks. And then I noticed that the wings are different from the new ones, which is very annoying. Why would you do that? Why would you do that? Does it fit still? Yes. Will it still work with espresso? Probably. But whenever you're doing it to where you have to back flush, leaks everywhere. But anyway, it took all of my power, which is substantial, to take off the split shot from this new one. So whenever I do give this away in a competition, I do apologize to whoever gets it. There's going to be some scratches on the bottom. Similar to this, now you can see there's some brass showing through, so this is definitely chrome-plated brass, but this one I did scratch as well, but it looks like stainless steel. Anyway, you may be asking, why do we need to know the pressure? Well, it's because no one really knows what the pressure is outside of the North American unit. Whole Latte Love, the official Gaggia distributor in North America, they have 9-bar units. That's what they kind of advertise as, and it seems that maybe Gaggia is just doing that for them. I'm not really sure. I got mine direct from Gaggia by way of Bean Bros. Let's check what this one is at, the European version. And here we go. Pressure is rising because it had to fill the basket first. And here we go. There's a little leak, but... All right, yep, this is definitely... All right, there's a leak, but we do know it is definitely at minimum a 14-bar spring. That almost hit 14, and there was still a leak on here. Don't know why there was a leak. That's in there tight, but what's coming out of Europe is definitely not a 9-bar spring. So you're still going to want to change that up if you're wanting something with lower pressure. Now, of course, you likely won't realize that amount of pressure inside of your extraction, but it's still going to be much higher than 9 bars. So that is something to take note of. Let's see what the Silvia is actually at. Hopefully we won't get the same type of leaks with this crud. With the other, you probably won't realize that much pressure. That's with a closed system. Granted, there was a leak, so that's going to leak some pressure. But even still, the bottom of the portafilter is open where the espresso is, so you likely won't build up that high. This, I'm going to be doing blind as well, but you'll notice right when I open it, the pressure should dip a bit. But anyway, I have this valve on here closed. Let's go ahead and start the shot and see where we're at pressure-wise. All right, so here we go. We're building, and it peaks at 9 bar. All right. So it's a 9 bar. It's 9 bar right out of the box for this one. Easy peasy. Comes right out of the box at 9 bar, whereas the Gaggia, at least in Europe, comes out closer to 15, 14 or 15. So you may want to do a little change on that. Now, the espresso I pulled, I did note that this one had that a little bit of like... deeper notes in it, and so there are times where maybe a higher pressure could taste better, but I across the board 9 bar is what people tend to prefer when it comes to these bigger numbers. I wouldn't say there's much of a difference between like 8 and 9, but maybe 5 and 9 or 9 and 15, things like that. If you're wanting to change the pressure down to 9, it is much more difficult to do in the Gaggia because you have to rely on that spring inside the plastic OPV, whereas in this one you've got that brass OPV and you can change it with a wrench. And bada bing, bada boom. Instructions online, good to go. Anyway, let's move on to checking out what's actually inside of these, as I mentioned with the OPVs. Is it recording? Getting into both machines is very easy. 2 screws, Phillips head here. You just kind of pull the lid off. This one has 4 Phillips head screws, and you just pull the lid off. And then we have access inside. We got to pull off this back plate, which is 2 extra Phillips head screws, and we can get to the solenoid right there. So now that we have this whole machine disassembled, let's just take a look at the insides and see how this machine actually ticks. First thing you'll notice is it's very cleanly put together. It's organized quite well. There's lots of space for activities. The way that this machine works, we have 2 tubes that go into the water tank. The one with the slit end right here is what has the intake of water into the machine. This one pushes water back into the water tank that is rejected from the OPV. So essentially we have water that goes. Once it hits that OPV kind of pressure, that spring inside, it bypasses water that's over the pressure that's needed for the system that is pressurized, and it discards that water. So it's cool water that goes back into your tank. Don't think it's water that goes through the whole assembly, but anyway, we'll get to that in a second. So this tube right here is connected directly to our vibratory pump. So water comes in here once that pump kicks on, and it starts to go through, and it pushes it out at 15 bar. We have 15 bar of pressure of cool water coming up through this braided cord, which is really nice that they have this instead of like that plastic tube. And so it comes up through here into the OPV. This is where that OPV spring comes into play, and that you can actually change with a set of wrenches, and there are videos all online and in their manual on how to make this change. But essentially, water above that certain pressure that you have the OPV set at is going to be rejected into this tube here. This tube that has the braiding around it circles around the boiler itself, and it comes, boom, right here back into your water tank. So it is just continually recycling water that is over the spring rated pressure essentially inside of our brass OPV here. That is something to note. It is a brass OPV, which is quite nice. A lot of people will get cheaper machines and they mod it with a brass OPV, which can just be a bit higher quality in general. Water comes in here, we have the heating element heating it all up, and then once it hits its temperature, well, thankfully, as opposed to like an E61, which has a thermosiphon unit, this has the boiler directly attached to the group head, which started with La Marzocco decades ago with their GS series, where they had the group completely saturated by the boiler. The steam from the top of the boiler travels through here when you put it into steam mode, so it heats up a lot hotter, pressurizes steam, and then we release it through a valve coming down here over to our steam knob. This is where it releases right down here on this elbow joint into the steam wand itself. So it's a very simplistically put together machine. Right here we have the G-car, which is very simple as well because there's only a couple of things this machine really does. This is completely shielded from the water tank, by the way. There is a piece of metal that goes over this, so all of this is protected. There's no way any type of steam or anything else can get to it. So it's a nice separation of those two things. What you'll see is with the vibratory pump, they have it off of any type of hard surface, and it's kind of being held on by these rubber clamps to help lessen the noise a bit. Of course, you can lessen the noise even more. There are modifications out there where people are lessening the noise even more so with their vibratory pumps, but that is something that is a nice, it's a nice thing, and it's easy to get in here and replace. There's lots of room. Now, if we flip the machine around, we'll be able to see the solenoid. So as you see right here, we have the three-way solenoid valve right below the group head. So just like on the Sanremo U, where they have put the solenoid in the exhaust valve of a typical E61 group, this is just below the brew group itself. And I can actually see from the side where the boiler actually connects to that solenoid. This is where the pressure escapes directly into the drip tray to give you that dry puck when you're done with your extraction. So right when you turn the brew shot back off, boop, just like so, it sucks out that pressure and it forces it down through here through that three-way solenoid valve. All right, now the Gaggia Classic is much easier to just straight up get to everything, so that is a plus. So like this one, everything is right here, right inside of the top. You take 2 screws off, which are just kind of housed inside of this plastic. This is a funnel that goes into the water tank down below, right down here, and then we can see everything. But if you really want to get to things, you may want to take the sides off, which is a bit more involved. But we've got our 3 switches with their corollary cords coming right back here. Below each of the switches, we have the same LEDs that we saw in the Rancilio, just a bit more difficult to get to. You can pretty easily take the boiler out with these bolts right down here. There are 4 holding the boiler on. We see up at the top of this brass boiler, which has that 135 or so mil volume, we see right here, this is where steam can release into the steam wand itself, and we have the valve on the steam knob. the 4 cords here for the 2 heating elements inside of the boiler itself, as well as this for the safety. And down on the side, we have the thermostat, which is where you can replace with a thermoprobe if you're doing the Gaggio mod. So it's pretty difficult to get to, honestly, when you're doing those mods because of how small everything is, though it is in a smaller footprint. In this, we have a plastic OPV as opposed to that brass one, which is sitting right here. This is where you would get inside to change the spring of the OPV if you got, you know, a 6-bar spring or whatever it might be, or if you wanted to modify your spring by cutting. But that's where you would do it, and it is a plastic one as opposed to the brass fitting that is inside of the Rancilio. Down here we have the Ulca vibratory pump. Just like on the other, it is actually situated with those rubber mounts onto the plastic cover for the PCB, which is right inside of here. We have all these wires coming back into this plastic box, which is kind of the housing for the PCB so that it doesn't get steam or wetness on it. That's another disadvantage of this, is everything is kind of right here, whereas on the Rancilio, it kind of separated in 3 areas. The solenoid you see up top, we have this little tube that goes down to where it spits out the remaining pressure. So it has some liquid coming out into the drip tray itself. Now on this, we have the vibratory pump with a tube that goes into the actual tank. So let's take this out. We have to remove the portafilter, the drip tray, and then we got our little tube for the solenoid release. But we pull this out, which can be a little tight because of those tubes inside. But anyway, so we see down here, that's the tube where it comes into the vibratory pump, comes up, and then we have our OPV. The water that is pressurized to the pressure that the spring is rated at comes through this orange braided cord down to the bottom of the boiler. The excess, just like on the Silvia, goes through this tube, and it gets spit right back into the water tank. So let's follow this orange braided cord, goes into our boiler right here, and this is where it gets heated up. We have the heating up, which this boiler is put right on top of the group head itself. So we have that brass onto the stainless steel portafilter, and it fills up here, and we have these 2 heating elements you can kind of see on the side, which heats it up. And then whenever you put it in steam mode, it gives it a ton of pressure due to a higher temperature, and we can release steam. And then once your shot is done and you turn off that brew switch, the depressurization happens from the back of this boiler. It goes through the 3-way solenoid, spits out the remainder into your drip tray with this little ugly steel. All right, let's make a little conclusion, but first, of course, a little more espresso. Let's get the temp down just a bit. Let's have a darker roast. So I'm gonna let it run a little longer, make it go down to that 90 or so degree. Pop that in, and we don't need a scale. We're just gonna eyeball it. Let's go. We'll pull a little Rizzy banger. We'll stop it right about there. Perfect. All right, so, oh, look at that. Look at that. Oh my. Huh. Cheers, everyone. Now, what we didn't get to in this review is the steaming performance of both. And again, it's because I don't really think one steams better than the other. They both will give you deliciously silky milky if you know what you're doing, which, if you followed me since the beginning, you would definitely know what you're doing because halfway and a quarter FTW. But anyway, obviously, the Rancilio takes a little bit longer, but I'll go ahead and show you what those steam capabilities are like. We're going to start them both same time. So this one, being a much bigger boiler, will take longer to get to temp. This one will be much faster because it's a much smaller boiler. Because of a bigger boiler, is you're going to have a much more intense steam coming out of this. Some have even described it as akin to commercial machines. Whereas this one is better than the original with the aluminum boiler, but it is still not as powerful as the Rancilio. Oh, this one's ready. So already the Gaggia is ready while we're still waiting on the big boy Rancilio. So I can go ahead and show you what the Gaggia steam power is like. So first off, this is not nearly as fun. It's not on a ball joint the way that this is. So as you see, this is on a ball joint. We can go up, down, side to side, do circles, and have a little fun. This one is just on a rotating on the x-axis type of situation. So we're going to go ahead, put this underneath to purge out some of that liquid. There we go. So this is what it kind of looks like. Still really wet steam, but, and then of course as we put it in, you can kind of hear, that's just water. I don't want to waste milk. I don't really drink milk drinks, so I try not to if I don't have to. But as you hear, the pressure goes down pretty quickly because of the tiny boiler. So when you're doing bigger milk beverages, it will go down, granted not as quickly as the original one would. This one, we're at temperature already. As you see, the orange light is off, meaning the steam boiler is no longer needing the heating element. So we can go ahead and clear out this steam wand. I'm just barely opening it so that liquid comes out. Woo! I mean, still pretty wet, as you can see. So it's still wet steam, but again, you're not getting dry steam unless you have a specific machine that advertises dry. But anyways, as we hear here, it doesn't really lose that pressure. And that's because it's twice as big of a boiler. I mean, listen to that. Good to go. Whoops, wrong way. There we go. There was an attempt by Slayer years ago to make a vaporizer system to where it would give you really dry steam, but it was in the end a gimmick and they broke a lot and people didn't really use it. But anyway, let's finish up. As far as what's going on inside of this, if you're someone who wants to have a machine that lives a long time, both of these check that box. But if there is a price disparity, is it worth that price gap? If in the US especially $400, but even in Europe about $200, I would say not in the US. I don't think this is worth $400 more, if that's the price. If you get it on sale where it's about $200, I would say I think it is worth it. You are able to get right out of the gate a much more pleasing temperature for most coffees unless you're doing super dark roast. And even with really dark roast, we saw just a 5-second purge of the group head gets you down to 89 to 90. If you want to go even lower, just a longer purge to remove some more of that liquid. Static temperature, what they kind of live at, this one's closer to 92, 93, whereas this one's closer to 95, 96. And it's much easier to hit this up to 98 without having to do any type of faffing trips like turning on that steam. This one, however, in order to get to those higher temperatures, you will have to play around with that steam, and that could cause for some too high of temps going over 100 degrees as we saw. So I think that definitely leans in favor of the Silvia. The portafilter, a bit annoying with the Gaggia, whereas the E61 here, it fits with most any of the ones that are out there. Steam performance definitely leans in favor of the Silvia, and I much prefer the knob here, but again, they're both going to give you silky milky, so I wouldn't really pay too much heed to that. But if you want one that is much easier to mod due to the space and organization inside, this one's definitely one to consider. I personally do not enjoy modding out the Gaggias. Like, I've done the Gaggiuino now 2 different times, same Gaggia, but I completely redid it twice. And it's just so difficult to work inside this small area, especially if you're new to wiring and all those different things. It's a bit more annoying to deal with this, whereas this one, it's like you're in a cavern. It's much more fun. In the end, though, they're both very similar machines. Unless you're in the US, you will have to play around with the pressure on this with a different spring, but that's a small price to pay for the quality of build you get. I'm such a believer in buying one of these machines as opposed to some of these, newcomers to the game that might promise a lot of budgets, a lot of budgetary type things, a lot of gimmicky kind of things that you could modify yourself because, well, these are established brands and they're going to be parts for years to come and service for years to come. Whereas these other ones, newcomers to the game, we don't really know what their longevity is. We don't know if it's easy to get these parts in the future whenever upgrades have been made. We know that these are relatively static throughout time. If I had a budget of, say, $700 and this was falling within that budget, I'm shelling out the extra $200 for this, unless I'm going to be taking away budget from a grinder, in which case I'm going Gaggia Classic Pro at $500. I still think this is the daddy of $500 and below, but if we're looking at them both in a similar category and you're trying to decide if it is even worth the extra $200, well, I hope that I've answered the question in this video. If you're interested in potentially winning one of these machines, which this will make a debut in a future video with the Gaggiuino, please check out my Patreon down below. Hitting the like, the subscribe, leaving a comment, sharing the video, all of that stuff really helps the channel. I thank you so much for being part of this community. It has been an incredible run, and I think that's it for today. I just drank something tasty, and I hope that you brew something tasty today. Cheers.